we go. Hi, my name is Terry Jackson. I'm president of the Lake Hartwell Association. You're watching this live, and we're recording this for later playback from the agency we work with for our social media work, Smart Marketing. For those viewing that might not know us, we are the agency that represents the interest of residents adjacent to Lake Hartwell and folks that use and benefit from Lake Hartwell. We represent these folks from the entire lake, both states and 6 counties. We're a unified voice into the Corps of Engineers, into various council meetings, and various other lake-related groups, and for other special interest areas, like today's discussion with SC Department of Environmental Services on HABs, harmful algal blooms. Our interest is in protecting the water quality, quantity, and safety of our lake and its watershed. Maybe you saw us speaking last night at the Anderson County Council meeting on riparian buffers. If you haven't visited our website or other social media sites, please do so to learn more about us, and please join our organization. Memberships help sustain the various activities we do that you can read about on our website. Memberships are our lifeblood, and we'd appreciate you joining our organization. We've been extremely fortunate to pull together this presentation from South Carolina Department of Environmental Services regarding harmful algal blooms, HABs. The concept for the presentation today only came to light last Friday. We're even more fortunate that DES has just taken new samples from our lake over the past couple of days, and that we can share this information and more just in time for the Memorial Day holiday weekend. This is an example of what LHA can do, as well as what great cooperation we get from our SC Department of Environmental Services folks. So we'll start this off with a presentation from DES and then move to address many questions that have emerged over the past several weeks since this HAB has become more prominent. Speaking today from DES will be Emily Bors, and Emily, I'll ask you to introduce the others from your team and take it from there, please.
Hi, so I'm Emily Bors, and I am the Harmful Algal Bloom Coordinator here at South Carolina Department of Environmental Services. We have a few members on this meeting as well at SCDES, and I believe they will just go around and do a quick intro themselves. So Lindsay, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Lindsay Lockenmeyer. I am our Aquatic Biology Section Manager. I've been with the agency for over 5 years now.
And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Bauman. I'm the Aquatic Science Division Director, and the Aquatic Biology section is one section within our group.
We also have Ann Clark, who is the Bureau of Water Chief, and Rob Devlin. There you go, Rob. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Rob Devlin. I'm the Assistant Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Water.
And good afternoon, I'm Ann Clark. I'm the Chief of the Bureau of Water.
And I'm Catherine Yon. I'm the Director of Creative Services for SCDES, just kind of helping facilitate some behind the scenes. So Emily, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Yes.
I am going to introduce you. I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I hope you guys listening, everybody listening that will view this, can truly appreciate, like I am, the support you guys have given by everybody, by putting this together, spending this hour with us, and clearly all the people you've had joining us today on this call. I really sincerely appreciate it, and I know everybody around here does. They're just going to have a huge interest in what you're showing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, now go, Emily. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Yeah, so I'm Emily Bors. I'm with SCDES, and I'm our Harmful Algal Bloom Coordinator. So I'm just going to go through real quick and kind of give you some background information on harmful algal bloom and monitoring. So what are HABs? Harmful algal blooms, or HABs, are when microscopic organisms such as phytoplankton overgrow under the right conditions in water bodies. These phytoplankton are naturally occurring in the water. It's just when there's things such as nutrients, temperature, increased light availability, or stagnant and low moving water that promotes them to rapidly grow. They can be associated with discoloration, films, or mats on the surface or even the bottom of a water body, and they can be in a variety of different colors. So typically, you're seeing bright green, bright blue in coloration. They can also be white. What we're seeing in Lake Hartwell sometimes has this pollen-like appearance to it. So sometimes is hard to differentiate a bloom from pollen, but we still kind of advise, if you see any kind of abnormal discoloration, to just avoid coming in contact with it. Not all algal blooms are harmful, but some blooms, such as cyanobacteria blooms, can produce toxins that affect humans, animals, and the environment. The four most well-known freshwater toxins, so freshwater toxins that impact potential lakes, are microcystins and cylindrospermopsin, which typically impact liver. And then we have saxitoxins and anatoxins, and those are neurotoxins. I've bolded microcystins and cylindrospermopsin as we have those two toxins in our state standards. We adopted them into our state standards in 2020. So the recreational criteria is we'll issue a recreational advisory on our lakes, streams, or estuaries when there's an exceedance in our algal toxins. So again, we have microcystins and cylindrospermopsin. So microcystins, if we're seeing at 8 micrograms per liter or higher, we'll issue a recreational advisory. And then cylindrospermopsin, it's at 15 micrograms per liter or higher. It's also important to note that EPA has drinking water health advisories for these toxins, so toxin levels in your finished drinking water, but we do not regulate our finished drinking water for these toxins. Additional ways they can be harmful outside of just producing algal toxins, they can create taste and odor issues, so they can also produce compounds that make the water taste and smell bad. These compounds actually don't have any, don't cause any harm. They just don't smell well, so it's unpleasant to deal with. They can also cause decreased oxygen concentrations in the water, especially when these blooms die off. They could result in fish kills. And then certain algal species can also cause physical damage. So there's an algal species called Cattosaurus that has spines that can end up clogging fish gills. And so this is a nice little table I like to show. On the left is some of the cyanobacteria or the algae species, the names of what they're called, and then the potential of what toxins they can produce. So the top one I highlighted is Dolichospermum. That's what we have seen in Lake Hartwell. That's the main one that's been blooming. And if you go to look and see what toxins it could potentially produce, it's all four that I mentioned earlier. But as I said, we only have state standards for the 2 toxins that we can test and issue recreational advisories for. We've also seen some Microcystis algal species, not as at high levels, but that one is only known to produce microcystins. So basically what happens when we receive a complaint about an algal bloom, we will try to go out and collect a water or algal bloom sample. So for example, we'll go to a cove like this where we notice an algal bloom is present. We will bring the sample back and we'll look at it under the microscope. And what we're trying to do is look at the algal species and determine, is it a harmful species, so a species that could produce toxins, or is it non-harmful? There are, algal species that aren't harmful. They're just, exist in the water body in natural conditions. So in this case, it's Dolichospermum that we're identifying under the microscope, which is a potential harmful species. So then the next step would be to determine what toxins it could be producing. So again, like I mentioned, it could potentially be producing those 4 toxins, and then we will test for cylindrospermopsin and microcystins as those are in our state standards. We've been updating our HAB monitoring app or web application that's online, and we have it as an advisory tier. So we have HAB reported sightings, which will be notified by a white square. That means that we have received a complaint. A citizen has called us, has let us know that the bloom has been sighted at that location, but a water sample from our agency has not actually been collected. The next tier is the HAB monitoring station, which is a blue circle. That means that we've sampled at that location, but we've not identified an algal species or toxins. The HAB watch is a yellow circle, and that's what Lake Hartwell is currently in, is a HAB watch, meaning that we have identified the presence of a potential toxin-producing species in the water body, but the toxins are less than our state standards. But we will continue to monitor the conditions. And then our last tier is the HAB advisory, which is the orange circle, and that means the toxins have exceeded our state standards. We have not issued any HAB advisories on Lake Hartwell. We've been continuing to be in the HAB watch tier. And so this is just a screenshot of what this web app looks like. So we have the whole lake highlighted in yellow as a HAB watch because we have seen the bloom on the majority of the lake, and we want people just to be aware that it could be at any of these locations at any point in time. And then again, you can see the different tier levels of the white squares versus the yellow circles. And then an important thing as well is if you click on an individual circle, you can get more information about that specific location. So for example, I clicked on this circle in a cove on Lake Hartwell, and this shows that, on May 6th, we took a sample, we analyzed it for toxins, and the toxin came back as 0.08. Micrograms per liter, so way below our recreational advisory limit. So if you click on the circles, that can provide some more information on when samples were taken. So we were first notified of a possible HAB by our regional offices on April 29th. We were able to work with them and receive samples from 3 locations on April 30th. We did confirm the presence of the cyanobacteria dolichospermum. We did do our toxin analyses. So microcystins was below 1, and our cylindrospermopsin was below our detection limit, so close to 0. We did a thorough survey of the lake on May 6th to update our HAB app with the latest information, with the new locations that we've seen. And then we've also did more sample analysis. So we collected 16 samples throughout the lake, and we saw similar toxin results to what we analyzed on April 30th. And like I said, we observed the HAB in many locations. We then went back out this past Monday, May 19th, and we conducted our second full lake survey. The bloom was still present, but it seemed to be less accumulated. We weren't seeing it, accumulated as much pushed back in the coves, but we were still kind of seeing these more streak-like accumulations in the water. So we still kept the watch in effect because we were still seeing it in some areas. And then we have updated our web app with the sampling areas and reported sightings as of 5/19. So if you go to our web app, everything that you're seeing on there should be updated as of May 19th forward. We did take 17 samples from the lake on that day, and we analyzed them again for microcystin and cylindrospermopsin toxins. Cylindrospermopsin was all below detection limits again, and then microcystins, the highest concentration we saw was 0.125. So again, we're seeing, some toxins presence for microcystins, but way below our recreational limit of 8. So overall, since May 5th, we have received and responded to over 100 complaints and questions about the blooms on Lake Hartwell. We've identified at least 2 cyanobacteria species in the samples, so the 2 that I've mentioned, and we've analyzed over 40 samples for microcystins and 26 samples for cylindrospermopsin toxins. So moving forward, we are advising people to still be cautious when recreating on the lake because we're still seeing the presence of the bloom there. We're still advising to avoid coming into direct contact with the bloom, and that includes letting your dogs swim in or near them. Boating, kayaking, and fishing are relatively low-risk activities. Again, our main concern is if you see the bloom accumulated, we don't want you directly coming into contact, as that's direct contact is the most likely way that you would interact with any toxins if they were present. We're going to continue to respond to complaints and update the HAB sightings on our app. And it is important to note that we have received additional sightings of the bloom since our sampling on Monday. I have received pictures of the bloom being accumulated in coves, so we are making sure to report that on our application. And then our plan is to continue to monitor on a bi-monthly or every 2 weeks basis. So our next scheduled monitoring will be the week of June 2nd. And so some frequently asked questions that I have been getting: how long will the bloom last? Unfortunately, I do not have an answer for that. HABs can last anywhere from days to weeks to months. And there's no definite answer on how long this specific bloom will last. The duration can depend on the environmental conditions. So again, how warm the weather is, how much light it's getting, how much nutrient input, wind, wave, and rain. So again, I don't have a for sure answer, but like I said, we're going to keep monitoring it, hopefully until the bloom dissipates. People are asking, can my dog swim in the lake? Again, our concerns with dogs, dogs tend to like the smell of algal blooms. They're kind of attracted to the mats. And dogs are not like people. They don't understand that maybe you shouldn't be drinking the water. So we are advising, to be really cautious with your dogs, because they do tend to consume the water, eat the algal mats, and lick their fur. So their risk of being exposed to these toxins, even though they're at low levels, is greater. Can I swim in the lake? Again, if you go to an area, a HAB hasn't been reported, you're not seeing any blooms present or discoloration there, and if you feel comfortable going in, you can swim. We are just advising people, if you're seeing the bloom, to just avoid contact. Again, the toxin levels are low, but we just want people to be aware that the bloom on this lake can change. It can move from cove to cove, just based on how the wind's pushing one day or the waves are moving one day. So we're just trying to provide this information to the citizens so they can make the best decision possible. And then, is our drinking water safe? So the finished drinking water that comes, out of your taps, most drinking water facilities, their normal treatment processes for drinking water removes these low level of toxins. We have reached out to the 2 major drinking water facilities on the South Carolina portion of Lake Hartwell and made them aware, of the bloom. And so they are ensuring that what they're doing to treat the water is conducive for the bloom. And so for contact information, if you have more questions or if you want to report a sighting, our HAB hotline number is listed. We have our email as well that you can send questions or report locations. And then the web map that I was talking about is located at that direct link. And I guess we can go into additional questions.
So most of the questions probably will come from me because we kind of polled people in our membership and asked them for questions. So it's kind of a sampling of things that I got in. So most of them are, if not all of them, will come from me asking you questions. You mentioned the web app, but you also mentioned the HAB app. Is that something different? And how
No,
do we get
it's
that
this.
one?
Yeah, it's the same. I've been trying to incorporate web into the verbiage more, because when I say HAB app, people think it's an application on their phone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, so I'm trying to say HAB web application, because it's basically a GIS website that you go to. So
okay.
I've been using that language, so I'm trying to, still incorporate both of them, but it's the same thing, but it's a website and it's that link that you would go to. It's not an application that you would put on your phone.
Thank you for that. Okay, as we're going into summer and temperatures are going up, is heat going to promote growth or does heat retard growth of what we have now?
It can be both. There's a certain point, where it gets too hot or there's too much light that it could be a negative towards the phytoplankton species, the algal species. There's such thing as too much light. But generally, when we have these warmer weather, that is prime conditions for these blooms to grow. But again, it's hard to say, what conditions are going to be more conducive to promote growth versus, having it dissipate.
Yeah, general rule is, cyanobacteria tend to outcompete other phytoplankton species in warmer waters. So that's a good rule of thumb.
Great. All right. You mentioned a little bit about nutrients. So, around the lake, generally, is somewhat of a buffer, right? Because all the adjacent property owners actually abut to the core property, which is the band that goes all around the lake. So there's somewhat of a buffer there, pretty much all the entire periphery of the lake. So I would guess could be somewhat of a retardant to the nutrients coming from the land. But basically, where are the nutrients coming from? Is it a lot from the homeowners adjacent, or is it further upstream?
So there's sources called non-point sources, meaning that they're coming from locations, around the lake, around the watershed that we can't directly point to. We don't know where their direct source may be influencing. But nutrients can come from a variety of different things. If people are putting fertilizers on their lawn, the incoming creeks or rivers or streams that are emptying into the lake, if there's agricultural land, that's upstream of that's, putting nutrients and pet waste and fertilizers that can influence it. Also, if, there's homes that have cut down trees or reduced some of that buffer, a lot of plants can help absorb the runoff that prevents it from going fully into the lake. So if there's less of that plants around, that could also promote more runoff to come in. So it could be from a variety of different sources and not just one singular source.
That was good. Prior to this, prior to this year, do you guys regularly test for these HABs on an annual basis, or only when you get a call in that people go, hey, I think there's something going on here?
So it's both. So our HAB program started in 2018, but we have routine stations on a lot of our major lakes across the state of South Carolina. So that includes Lake Hartwell. So there's probably 3 or 4 stations on Lake Hartwell that our regional office up in Greenville will go out and sample from May through October and send us samples for us to look at for HABs. However, these stations, they're located in more open water, so they might not be seeing a bloom that's, if a bloom is happening in an area where the station's not located, we may not see that. So we do routinely sample the lake, but we also really rely on citizens calling in, letting us know that they see something. Like I mentioned earlier, we were notified of this bloom because a couple of citizens reached out to our local regional Anderson office to say, hey, the water's blue and green, it looks weird, can someone come out here? And so that's how we were made aware of that. So it's a combination of both. But as far as I know, since we've had this program in 2018, we have not been notified, or we have not seen a bloom like this to this extent until now.
That was going to be my next question, actually. When was the last time it was documented to be present? Or, I've lived here several years, and I've never, that I recall, heard about it, or certainly heard about it to the significant level that it is now. So, but any reason why you think it's significantly worse this year?
Unfortunately, no. Again, it's just some conditions led to it being favorable to it outcompeting the other, species that exist in the water. So, were the temperatures leading up to this last month really, really warm? Was there a couple months maybe last year that really there was a lot of rain that was dumping a huge nutrient pulse into the lake? We unfortunately can't say for sure.
Other than the Tougaloo River, which you mentioned, I think you said you sampled or has been sampled. Anything else like on the Georgia rivers, Georgia waters themselves? I know you guys are SCDES, SC, but anything other than Tougaloo that would be more representative of what's going on the Georgia side?
So we have gotten some reported sightings on the Georgia side. As we get those reportings, we have been adding them to our HAB web map app that I've been saying. We do not, when we go out and do our lake surveys and our sampling, we do not go to the Georgia side just because that's outside our jurisdiction. Or South Carolina, and just resource wise are focusing on the South Carolina side. So it has been spotted on the Georgia side, and we have been listing those reported sightings on the web app. But in terms of actually sampling, we have not.
Great. The recent recreational water watch said the entirety of Lake Hartwell and Anderson County, but I would assume Oconee and Pickens would also be in it, or what is the status of Oconee and Pickens counties? Because again, the water watch, I think if I read it correctly, said Anderson County.
Emily, you want me to speak to that one?
You can go for it.
Yeah, so a few weeks ago, when we were first tipped off about the situation on Lake Hartwell, the majority of the sightings that we had received were from the Anderson County part of the lake. We hadn't yet at that point received a lot of reports from areas outside of Anderson County. So our initial press release from, I think it was April 30th, specified Anderson County, but we quickly started to, I think once the press release got out there, we started to get a lot more visibility on the lake, and our distribution of reported sightings kind of expanded from there pretty quickly beyond just Anderson County.
Okay. So you would suggest the watch now is, again, from South Carolina side at least, would be include Pickens and Oconee.
Correct.
Can the algae spread faster if oh no, I want to go back. If I'm looking at cloudy water, if you will, and Emily, you mentioned maybe it's the pine, I can't remember.
The pollen.
The pollen. I mean,
Mhm.
can you really tell if you're looking at murky water, whether you're looking at pollen or whether you're looking at the algal blooms or anything?
No, and I mean, a lot of these algal blooms, as you can see from these pictures, a lot of them, when I do see them, have this pretty characteristically bright blue, green coloration.
Yeah.
The bottom picture, if you look at that from a distance, that kind of does look like pollen. But again, we would still say, you see that accumulation, you see that doesn't necessarily look like how the water should normally look. So we still advise, if you see something, and even if you think it may be pollen, to just stay out of it and still report it. The only way you can for sure know if it's algae or pollen is if I get a sample and look at it under the microscope.
There's nothing easily that we can test or check on our own.
Yeah, correct. So again, if you see stuff like these pictures, like those are pretty apparent that they're, that's not how the water normally looks. You should probably avoid, coming into contact with it. But I also like to say, a lot of the people who live on the lake, they see the lake day to day. They know typically what their lake looks like in the backyard, right? So if they see something that's kind of abnormal and they're not sure what it is, again, reach out, potentially, we can go check it out. But sometimes after a big storm event, the water's going to look cloudy, just because it's mixing up more things.
Right. So actually that leads also to my next question. So for example, if there's an accumulation of murkiness, let's call it, right adjacent to shore where my dock is, right there as I walk in with a walkway, and yet behind on the other side where the dock is, which is going to be, on the back side of the dock towards the lake, which is going to be probably 80 feet out from the shore side, it's typical clear. Would it be okay to swim out there just to avoid getting near shore, or is that still too close?
That's going to be a personal decision. So like I said, if you see the bloom on one side and you don't see it on the other, again, the toxin levels that we're seeing are pretty low, but we just want people to be aware that if there's a bloom there, it has the potential to produce those toxins. And then again, if it's clear on the other side, a big gust of wind, the waves could change and start pushing it towards that side where you are recreating at. But again, we're not necessarily telling people to not swim in the water. We're just telling them, that the conditions of this bloom can move just based on how the water's moving. And so the conditions can change. And we just want people to be aware that it is out there and to just, make the best decision.
Does it travel or seem to spread faster if like a boat travels through it and causes it to dissipate a little bit, or does that really not make a big difference? Or does it get stuck to the hull of a boat and would that allow it to transfer or what?
Yeah, so I would say from, this lake standpoint, we've seen the bloom in a lot of different areas all across the lake. So I would say, traveling from one cove of the lake to the, on the same water body right now, just because we are seeing it everywhere, the transfer component of it is relatively minor. However, if you have your boat on, Lake Hartwell, and then you're going to hop over to Lake Kiwi, it is possible that if you have some of the algae on the hull of your boat and you're not rinsing your boat off before you get into the other lake, there could be some transfer into that new lake that you're putting the boat into. So we're just advising people, to fall, once you leave the lake, just rinse your boat off before you enter a new lake. Again, clean your boat, just kind of boat keeping practices.
Does this algae have sort of a lifespan? I mean, I know we've talked about, when it might go away, blah, 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 heat, temperature, but I mean, in general, does it have a lifespan or anything?
No. So again, it's just going to depend on the environmental conditions. So again, what's promoting it and keeping it growing. If that's still a consistent source, they might still keep growing. But, so unfortunately, there's not a typical span that we can attribute to this kind of algal bloom.
What about people that use the lake for irrigation? Their grass, or some have vegetables, gardens, things like that. What about that risk?
Yeah, so if there's concerns about that, they can reach out, I believe, to the Department of Agriculture. There's still some, studies being done on that. But, if you're using lake water to irrigate, or at least wash your fruit and vegetables, we do recommend before you consume the fruit and vegetables to, rinse them off with fresh tap water before you do so.
Let's see, going down my list. So is there anything anybody can do to minimize the annual impact of these algal blooms or to keep it from spreading?
Yeah, so again, we don't know necessarily where the source of it is and why it started. But just, reducing any potential nutrient input, so not over fertilizing your lawn. If you mow your lawn, to pick up the grass clippings, so those aren't being washed in. Picking up any pet waste that you may have. So things like that, that homeowners can do on a day-to-day basis could help. But, to figure out larger potential nutrient impacts into the lake may require a more thorough study to be done.
Yeah, and also making sure that septic systems, especially right on the lake, are behaving effectively and efficiently.
Yeah, that's all nutrients, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that can be put on algae to neutralize it or to kill it?
Emily, want me to take this one? Yeah, so there are treatment options. There are algicides and herbicides that can be applied. We haven't experimented on something the size of or to the extent of Lake Hartwell. But yeah, there are options, but treating something the size of Lake Hartwell would probably be a significant challenge.
All right. My last question, then Sarah's gotten a few from a few folks that have been listening live. But my last question, what follows a bloom like this? Is there like a fall bloom or something like that? Or once we get through the spring and summer, it'll at least be behind us this year?
Yeah, so again, HABs, these kind of blooms are, unpredictable, and we don't necessarily know. There are sometimes fall blooms of a different algal species. There's diatoms, which typically like colder weather. In freshwater, they're typically not considered harmful. But we've had lakes in South Carolina have blooms, to this extent. And then the next couple summers, there have not been a bloom. So there's no telling really, if this bloom kind of dies off and goes away, doesn't necessarily mean, it's going to not bloom again, but it also, it may I don't know the words I'm trying to look for. But it just depends. So just because it bloomed, this season doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see it again next season. So it really just depends on a lot of different environmental conditions, like I said, that unfortunately we can't really predict.
So for your guys, I'm sure you have some interaction with other states, other agencies, other lakes. Is Hartwell kind of a one-off this year, or are other lakes experiencing similar, maybe various degrees, but similar issues with HABs this year that we are? Or do you have any perspective on how we're comparing to other lakes?
So we had a smaller lake kind of on the coast near Hanahan, Charleston area, but it's a pretty small lake. I forget the acreage, but very, very small in comparison to Lake Hartwell. And so that one did have a bloom earlier this year in March. But I would say right now, Lake Hartwell is the first major lake that we have seen this season with a bloom to this extent.
Well, you've burned out all my questions extremely well. Sarah's got a few that have come in, and then we'll maybe conclude here in a couple of minutes.
Hey guys, thank you so much for all of that information. That was super informative, and we're getting a lot of great feedback from people who've joined us live. I have a couple of questions that came in. One of those being, has anyone come forward that's been in contact with the algae bloom, having any type of symptoms, like we discussed, itchy eyes, rashes, anything like that? That would be a symptom from the toxins.
I can answer that first. That would be me. I happened to be waiting around in it the other day and not really realizing what it was, and it did not faze me.
Okay.
But I wasn't in there for a long time, and at the time I kind of thought more it was still the late recurring pine pollen. So I was in that for that reason. Knowing what I know now, I probably wouldn't have. But to answer your question, for me specifically,
you didn't experience
not a
anything.
bit. Not
Okay.
a bit.
What about you guys? Has anybody, contacted you guys, via the hotline or anything like that you guys are aware of?
Yeah, so we had one potential rash-like symptoms, and that was at the beginning or near the end of April, in the beginning of our sampling. They were believed to have potentially come in direct contact with the bloom and got some rashes. And then we had one potential dog who had some symptoms from potentially swimming in the bloom. Both of them are okay. And, we checked out the areas, but again, that's why, we're saying if you see the bloom and the discoloration, the best way to minimize, the potential rashes or your dog having any symptoms is just to keep them from that area.
Okay. And then another question we had, do you think this could be a contributing factor to the hurricane that came through, Hurricane Helene, and all of the I know you guys mentioned the lack of plants kind of guarding the lake, trees down, things like that, all of the rain that came in. Could that be a contributing factor to the bloom?
It definitely could. Unfortunately, we have no way to test that, right? Because we don't necessarily know how much, because we also got a lot of rain and there was a lot of flooding. So again, that's washing a lot of potential nutrients in there. And like you said, removing the coverage. So that definitely crossed our minds as a potential reason why we were maybe seeing it start this season. So again, we can't say with 100% certainty, but it is potentially a contributing factor.
Okay. And then there were a few other questions that were asked by viewers, but you guys answered some of those, like the swimming in the lake and, what homeowners could do, how they could help, prevent this from happening and things like that. So that was all of the questions we have received so far. So Terry, I'm going to turn it back to you and let you guys take it away.
So Emily, any closing comments or thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, like we would just kind of have been reiterating, we're sampling, we're going out there every other week. We do really appreciate when people call or email and report sightings of the bloom in their area. We're based in Columbia. We've been trying to, get out there as much as we can. But you guys are on the lake, you see the blooms, you see them occurring. So we really do appreciate when you all do let us know and notify us of seeing it. And again, we're seeing low levels of toxins. And so we just want the public to be aware that it's there, and are just trying to provide you all with as much information as we can for everyone to make the best decision for their situation.
On behalf of everybody around this lake, I can tell you, we can't thank you enough for summarizing this, the patience with the questions, taking time on a very short notice to let us know what's going on. I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate you and the entire organization for what you guys have done supporting us up here. It's very, very much appreciated. For everybody that's watching, I hope the session's been helpful to everybody. If you're not a member of LHA, please join us. Please join LHA to enable things like this to continue, and ask your friends and neighbors to join us also. And with that, I wish everyone, I will say thank you again to everyone, those that called in and you guys that put all this together, and have a great, safe, healthy Memorial Day weekend. Kill that one. Dead.